family owns a small vacation home in the remote mountains of Colorado. It's been in our family for over 40 years, long before I was born. My parents, being avid skiers, were the driving force behind buying the place. Over time, the house began to show its age. The walls creak in the cold, the roof leaks during heavy storms, and my dad has spent countless weekends repairing it. Despite its flaws, it holds countless childhood memories for me and my older brother, Ethan. This story, however, isn't one of those fond memories. It's something much darker, something that haunts me to this day. I was 8 years old, and Ethan was 11 when it happened. We were staying at the cabin during a brutal blizzard, the kind that blankets everything in white and silences the world. The storm was fierce, but Ethan and I couldn't resist going outside to play. The property is surrounded by endless woods, with a long, dead-end road leading to a few other isolated homes. It was the perfect place for adventures, or so we thought. Our favorite game was a snowball war with a twist. We each built a fort somewhere on the property, hiding a jewel, a giant snowball, and the goal was to steal the other's jewel and return it to your base. That day, Ethan decided to set up his fort on the neighboring property. The neighbors were almost never there, and their house always gave me the creeps. It was old, with dark windows that seemed to watch you, and a front door that never quite closed right. Still, we didn't think much of it at the time. Ethan headed off to set up his fort, disappearing down the road. I waited for his signal, a whistle we always used to start the game, but it never came. I stood there, snow whipping against my face, for what felt like forever. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Something didn't feel right. I decided to go look for him. The woods were dense and shadowy, even during the day, and the thought of walking through them during a blizzard was terrifying. So, I stuck to the road, trudging through the knee-deep snow. The wind howled around me, drowning out all other sounds, and my heart raced with every step. When I reached the neighbor's driveway, I stopped. Through the bare, icy branches, I could see Ethan's fort, but he wasn't there. I called out, "Ethan," but the wind carried my voice away. I hesitated, then cut through the trees to sneak closer. That's when I heard her. "Excuse me, are you looking for someone?" I spun around to see a woman standing at the front door of the neighbor's house. She was old, with a pale, almost gray complexion and sunken eyes. Her smile didn't reach them. "Your brother isn't here," she said, her voice soft but unnerving. I stammered, "We're playing a game. He's supposed to be here." Her smile widened. "Why don't you come inside? It's too cold out here." Everything about her made my skin crawl. Her voice was too sweet, her smile too wide. As I took a step back, something caught my eye. A face in the upstairs window. It was just a flash, but I saw someone watching me. Half their face was covered by a black beanie, and the rest was hidden behind the windowsill. My stomach churned. At first I thought it was Ethan, but something about the figure felt wrong. I looked down and saw a set of footprints leading to the house. They matched Ethan's boots. "Come inside," the woman urged again, her tone sharp this time. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest as I screamed, "Ethan!" The woman's smile vanished, replaced by a look of frustration. Her eyes narrowed as she stepped forward. From inside the house, I heard heavy footsteps thudding down the stairs. The sound was deliberate, menacing. Someone else was in there. Panic took over. I turned and ran as fast as I could back through the snow, my breath fogging up the freezing air. Behind me, the woman shouted something I couldn't make out. I risked a glance back, but the face in the window was gone. The trail of footprints that had led to the house doubled back, heading into the woods. My mind raced with questions. Was Ethan running? Was he hiding? As I neared our driveway, I heard my dad's whistle, a sound that usually meant it was time to come inside. Relief washed over me as I saw my dad and Ethan standing there, waiting for me. Before I could say a word, Ethan blurted out, "There were people in the neighbor's house. They told me to come inside." My heart dropped. The same thing happened to me. I gasped. My dad's expression darkened. He grabbed a weapon and headed down the road, telling us to stay inside with Mom. When he came back, his face was pale. He told us the front door was locked, and no one answered when he knocked. He went to another neighbor's house, where they contacted the owners. Here's the part that still gives me chills. The owners said they weren't there. No one was supposed to be in that house. The police were called, and Ethan and I had to describe the woman to an officer. According to my dad, the back door had been unlocked. The police searched the house, but found nothing. For weeks, I couldn't shake the image of that woman or the figure in the window. To this day, I don't know who or what was in that house. But one thing is certain. If Ethan or I had gone inside, we might not have come back out. I'm a 21-year-old female, and this story took place when I was around 11. I remember this day vividly because it was the first time I was ever allowed to walk to school and back by myself. Up until the age of 14, I lived in what we thought was a safe place in Chaka County, New York. Everyone knew everyone, and if you thought you'd get away with something, you better be prepared to have your ear chewed off by the time you got home. But then, there was this one day. It was a cold winter morning, and school, unfortunately, was still open. All the neighborhood kids had to walk through knee-high snow just to get there. It took me longer to leave the house that day because I was used to walking with my older sister. She always knew the best routes, and I relied on her completely. I used to make fun of her for being paranoid and taking different routes home every day. Little did I know, that habit would end up saving my life. That morning, as I was waiting by the door to leave, my mom came up to me. She told me she could drop me off because my sister was too sick to go to school. But being a bratty kid, I made a big fuss about walking alone. I'm almost 12 years old, I argued. All my friends' parents let them walk alone. My mom stared at me for a long moment before finally agreeing. "Fine," she said, "but make sure you pay attention to cars." Her concern was understandable. I had been hit by a car when I was 9 and almost died. Even though I hardly nodded at her warning, I knew it came from a place of love. As I headed out the door, I decided to take my time. My sister was always in a rush to get to school early, but with her sick at home, I could finally enjoy the walk. I played in the brown slush on the side of the road and even made odd-looking snowballs to see how far I could throw them. About halfway to school, I noticed a white van following me. At first, I thought nothing of it, but as I bent down to make another snowball, I caught a glimpse of the van slowly creeping up the street. My heart skipped a beat. Maybe I'm overreacting, I told myself. Still, I picked up my pace and hurried to school. I glanced over my shoulder just before I reached the school grounds. The van was a few feet behind me, moving unnervingly slow. It wasn't until I stepped onto the school property that it sped past me. I thought that was the end of it. But throughout the day, I noticed the van again. Whenever I stared out the classroom window, it was parked nearby. Adults later tried to convince me it wasn't the same van, but I knew it was. It had a bright yellow smiley face sticker on it, something I could never forget. Though the windows were tinted, I felt their gaze piercing through me. When the school day ended, I wasn't ready to go home. It was too late to call my mom, she was at work, and my sister was still homesick. I had no choice but to walk alone. Hoping to avoid the van, I decided to take a different route home. I didn't know this route very well, but anything felt safer than being seen by that van again. Unfortunately, I made a terrible mistake. The route I chose eventually led back to the main street I had taken to school that morning. And there it was, the white van with the smiley face sticker hidden behind a row of cars. I tried to stay calm as I walked past it, but when I heard the van door slightly click open, panic took over. I ran. The sound of heavy footsteps followed me, 2 sets rushing through the snow. They were getting closer. I didn't think, I just acted. I cut through someone's backyard, my boots sinking into the thick snow, and sprinted toward my house. My lungs burned and my heart pounded, but I could still hear them behind me. Finally, I reached my front door. I banged on it with all my might, screaming for someone to let me in. My sister opened the door, looking confused. But one look at my face, and she knew something was wrong. She pulled me inside and locked the door. The van was still outside. It stayed there until my older brother got home. After that, we didn't talk about it much, but we both knew how close I had come to going missing. For years, I tried to bury the memory. But in 2013, one of my hometown friends sent me an article. It told the story of a girl my age who had been kidnapped and assaulted. The details wouldn't have scared me as much if it hadn't mentioned the white van. It was early December. I was at home that night, spending my day off inside by the fireplace. The snow and biting cold outside were enough to keep me in. I kept myself busy doing chores around the house, but overall, it was a peaceful day. I had the news running in the background, listening to reports about high winds and an incoming blizzard. They warned that it would get worse as the night went on. By 5 p.m., I could already hear the wind howling against the house, rattling the windows. I turned on another channel, hoping for something less stressful, but the storm was hard to ignore. By 7 p.m., the blizzard had fully arrived. The wind was slamming against the house, and the snow outside seemed to swallow everything in its path. Curious, I got up from the couch and walked to the window facing my backyard. At first, all I could see was a flurry of snow pouring down, with almost no visibility. But then, something else caught my eye. A figure. Someone was walking through my backyard. My yard was large, unfenced and open, but seeing someone out there, in the middle of a blizzard, didn't make sense. They were moving at a steady, unhurried pace, heading toward the far end of the yard. Before long, the storm and darkness consumed them, and I couldn't see them anymore. I stayed by the window, straining my eyes for another glimpse. Who would be out there in weather like this? The end of my yard led to a road. But there was nothing for miles beyond that. It wasn't a path anyone could realistically take on foot, not in this storm. 5 minutes later, just as I was trying to push the thought out of my mind, there was a knock at the door. I froze. Cautiously, I went to the door and cracked it open just enough to see who was there. A man stood on my porch, bundled in a heavy winter coat. His face was pale, his nose bright red, and he was visibly shaking from the cold. I immediately wondered, was this the same person I'd seen in my backyard? "How can I help you?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. The man gave a weak smile, his teeth chattering. "I'm waiting for a ride," he said. "Could I come inside for a few minutes? Just until they get here. It's freezing out here." For a moment I hesitated. His words sounded reasonable, and the storm outside was brutal. It's easy to think you'd never let a stranger into your house, but when they're standing in front of you, looking half dead from the cold, the decision doesn't feel so simple. Still, I couldn't bring myself to let him in. "You can wait on the porch," I said finally. "There's an overhang to block the snow. I'll grab an old jacket for you." He didn't look happy with my answer, but he nodded and moved to sit on a chair on the porch. I quickly closed and locked the door before heading upstairs to grab the jacket. It was an old, oversized coat, worn and torn, but it was better than nothing. As I walked back downstairs, ready to open the door and hand it to him, a strange feeling stopped me in my tracks. Something wasn't right. My heart started racing as I leaned over and looked through the peephole. The man was no longer sitting on the chair. He was now standing directly in front of the door, his face inches from the peephole. His hand was on the doorknob. I froze, watching as he twisted the knob, testing it, as if he were waiting for me to unlock it. My breathing grew shallow, and I stepped back, pulling out my phone with trembling hands. I dialed 911, whispering into the phone as quietly as I could. "I think someone's trying to break into my house." The operator assured me that the police were on their way, but I couldn't take my eyes off the door. I stood there, heart pounding, staring at the knob, waiting for it to turn. When I finally mustered the courage to look through the peephole again, he was gone. I flung the curtain aside to check the yard, but there was no sign of him. Not on the porch, not in the driveway, not anywhere. It was as if he'd vanished into the storm. The police arrived shortly after, but there was nothing for them to find. No tracks, no sign of the man. That night, I couldn't shake the thought of what might have happened if I had unlocked the door. What he planned to do, I'll never know. But I do know one thing. I pray he never comes back.